Australia's red meat industry is committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. Feeding livestock native seaweed is being hailed as a potential solution to reduce the greenhouse gases they burp out. But as Landline's Margot Ellis discovered in March last year, putting theory into practice isn't so simple.
This red puffy seaweed has a superpower. A small portion of it, fed to ruminant animals, including sheep and cows, nearly eliminates methane from their burps. Discovered by the pig scientific agency CSIRO, Australia's native Asparogopsis seaweed is being hailed as a key tool to reduce the effect of livestock on climate change.
I'm so excited to be on board with a project that is leading the way and actually going to make a difference to the environment, and to do what I love doing, working with seaweed, and actually be making a difference. It lights up my day every day.
While the CSIRO established the science about how Asparagopsis reduces methane emissions, how to grow lots of it and effectively feed it to animals are still unknowns. Dr. Margie Rule is part of a team on the cusp of growing it commercially.
So these tiny little ones here are all spores. We've got hundreds and hundreds of them in each fruiting body. And once we collect them, we'll pop them in little jars and grow them bigger and bigger. And then once they reach their full size, they'll look like this.
Right, so you can scale up pretty quickly with spores that are that productive.
Yeah. Eventually we'll have enough to fill all the big tanks and we'll be producing lots and lots of stuff.
Sea Forests began in 2019. The company is arguably the closest in the country to growing it at a commercially viable scale. But it's still learning how to get the best out of the crop. So what happens in here, Margie?
So this is our land-based hatchery. So after we start our growth in the laboratory and the spore release, we'll bring the plants in here where we look after them in very specific environmental conditions. And this is what we're mainly working with. This is the life phase that we're growing on the ropes. This is the gamidifier.
So you've got to get it right here so that it can really prosper when it's either out at sea or even in the land-based facility here.
Absolutely. We tend to it like a baby in here, and it's really well loved, and once it's under exactly the right conditions, we can take it out to sea.
But you can't tell me too much about it, right?
No, this is what we're working on and developing. Absolutely.
Confidential.
Yeah.
Some in the company are completely new to farming. Co-founder Sam Elsom worked in sustainable fashion before shifting to the in vogue seaweed industry.
I was drawn to seaweed initially for its environmental potential in terms of its ability to capture carbon, and then Asparogopsis became our focus through Landline. I learned about Asparogopsis from a segment that you guys did with CSIRO and their research in 2016.
So the weather is not too nice today on the east coast of Tasmania, but we are undeterred, and I'm very excited to see how they're actually growing the Asparagopsis. When the CSIRO did its research, they were hand harvesting, and they said the biggest challenge was growing it commercially and at scale. So I'm keen to see how Sea Forest is overcoming that problem. The company has taken over a mussel farm in Triabunna, about an hour northeast of Hobart. There are two varieties of Asparagopsis native to Australia. The temperate variety thrives year-round in the cool waters on Tasmania's east coast.
Basically, we deploy the ropes with the seaweed attached, the very small seedlings that you would have seen in the hatchery, and then in 8 weeks' time we harvest it.
So this isn't ready for harvest
This
yet?
is not ready for harvest. This will have another month in the water.
And how much are you hoping to be able to harvest from, a length of rope?
Well, we're getting around about a kilogram a metre of rope, so quite a lot. Far more than we had expected, which is also really fantastic.
Currently, 2 kilometres of line has been strung, but they've got plenty of space to grow with an 1,800 hectare lease. Anything grown and harvested is valuable because every part of the seaweed contains the active compound bromoform. The next hurdle is getting it in the bellies of animals.
So it's a big challenge. The grass-fed system is a big one because we don't have a solution at the moment. We have some ideas and some R&D that we're working on into how we can achieve Asparogopsis supplement in a grass-fed system. But, you know, that will come along in time.
Major dairy processor Fonterra Australia is trialling feeding Asparogopsis to cows. Milk supplier Richard Gardner jumped at the chance to be part of it. So Richard, what's the significance of this?
Well, Margot, this is very exciting. This is Asparogopsis seaweed in canola oil. And in my mind, this is the future of the livestock industry worldwide.
1,300 cows are milked on this fully irrigated dairy farm in central Tasmania. A small part of the herd are being fed the seaweed as part of the trial.
So the first stage of the trial is looking at just purely the safety risks around milk. We're not going to introduce a new product into the feed without making sure that it doesn't have a downstream impact. So if we get through that process and then we'll move on to looking at if we feed it to half the herd, do we see a production increase or a feed efficiency gain, which is probably more likely what we'll see.
You're pretty confident it will have a benefit, right?
So I've spent a bit of time looking at the science around the up till now that CSIRO have done, and in some cases there was more than 20% increase in feed conversion efficiencies in beef cattle.
If the seaweed results in cattle putting on more weight from the same amount of food, that will be a big selling point. Trials are still going, but Fonterra Australia has reported that so far there are no residues or negative impacts on the milk quality. Richard and his daughter Molly have already been making climate-friendly changes around the farm. So you guys have already done a fair bit of work looking at your carbon emissions from this property, is that right?
Yeah, so at the start of this year, we decided to get an idea of the overall emissions from our dairy farm, and we used the dairy-based carbon calculator to calculate the CO2 equivalents in tonnes from this dairy farm up here. So we found that there was 6,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalents coming from the dairy farm, and 4,000 tonnes of that was from enteric methane, which comes straight from the cow's mouth.
So that's a huge
Yeah, so
proportion.
it's around 2/3 of total emissions coming straight from the cow.
Right. Good thing you can address that problem then now.
Well, yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, no, that was the elephant in the room. We could control, there was potential to manage some of the other outputs like nitrogen emissions and waste management, but this was always the one that we could never do anything about.
The gardeners have also been trying to reduce their use of synthetic nitrogen. It's unrelated to methane from burps, but nitrous oxide, which comes from the fertiliser, is a potent greenhouse gas. Richard Gardner is using more clover in the paddock instead.
Well, we're certainly getting there. Yeah, we've got a pretty strong aim to try and get around 35% minimum of the pasture content is clover rather than ryegrass. So the ryegrass is the thing that drives the system, but we've got to have nitrogen to grow grass, and that's got to come from somewhere. And if we don't get it out of a bag, which we'd rather not do, we really want to see it come from clover. And it also provides a lot of feed quality too.
The cows love it.
Yeah, they absolutely love it. Yeah. We don't want to give them too much.
Yeah.
It's a bit like ice cream.
So you have to work pretty hard to manage that 1/3, and now a little bit of seaweed pretty much takes care of the other 2/3.
Yeah, so when we originally did the audit at the start of the year, we sort of found that Asparogopsis is going to be one of the most viable options to reduce enteric methane, and it's really exciting that now it could actually be something that we can start feeding cows and it can reduce the problem.
On a sheep property in Tasmania's Midlands, Simon Cameron is also trialling feeding Asparogopsis. Simon's environmental efforts are widely recognised. 85% of his more than 3,000 hectare property is preserved in native grasslands or lightly timbered country. So show me, how do you get this ready for the sheep?
All right, well, I keep the main bucket of Asparogopsis here in the old fridge, and each day I go through this little routine.
It doesn't look that appetising, to be honest, when you look at it like that.
You're not a sheep.
That's true.
So there we go. This is Asparogopsis mixed with canola oil. And what I need to do is I need to get the daily dose, which is about 350 mils.
For how many sheep?
That's for 25 sheep.
50 sheep are part of the trial flock, but half of those are in a control group that won't get the seaweed.
So let's head to the paddock. I'll take that one. And if you could bring
I'll get the control.
the blue one,
Yep,
and away we go.
away we go.
Might want to grab your hat.
Hand feeding is labour intensive, and providing a supplement to sheep that spend much of the year freely grazing backcountry is challenging. Simon is exploring other options like using a salt lick.
That's the process of putting out the grain each day, and then the sheep will come and then we'll go and do the next mob, which is the
seaweed mob.
the seaweed mob with the Asparogopsis supplement.
So with this method of feeding out, how sure can you be that they're all getting, the same amount of the active ingredient?
What we're doing here is we're doing a real world trial, if you like, and this is the way it's going to be in the real world. Some will come faster than others, some will eat more, some will eat less. What we're trying to do is we're trying to monitor each sheep.
Throughout the 300-day trial, they'll weigh the sheep each month, check their condition, and at the end, analyse individual fleeces.
So we're concerned in the first instance about the animal welfare. We're also interested to see what happens. The process in their gut converts the methane, or what would have become methane, to energy. Now, we don't know whether that energy is going to make a bigger sheep, or make it grow more wool, or make it grow better wool, stronger wool. So we won't really know until the end of the project and we've analysed the wool, what the benefits from doing the feed supplement really is.
There's a lot of hype around Asparogopsis. The government is trumpeting it, and the CSIRO was awarded $1 million when it won a prestigious international prize for its work. A recent report claims Asparogopsis will be at the forefront of creating a $1 billion seaweed industry in Australia by 2040. But leading seaweed expert Dr. Pia Winberg is cautious about how rapidly Asparogopsis will become a commercial success.
So Asparogopsis technically can convert methane emissions to carbon dioxide emissions in cattle. The challenge there is similar to the reproductive challenges of any seaweed, is that we're not on top of how to propagate it. It's not a big crop yet. So there's years of technology to get to the point where we can start to farm it, and then it's also a very expensive crop. So the reality of it becoming a commodity at scale in cattle is a bit of a challenge, today it's not a short-term solution to climate change.
No one can yet put a figure on what will make Asparogopsis viable for everyone in the supply chain. Dairy, meat and wool producers are hopeful it will have a production benefit to offset the cost and effectively pay for itself.
Technologically it works, but does the business case work? And that's where the challenge is. And if people are investing with really good intentions, it's a little bit like the algal biofuels industry, which also technically works. You can fly a plane on algal biofuels, but we saw tragically that the investments were made not understanding that the business case didn't stack up.
With Australia's red meat and dairy industries committed to going carbon neutral, Asparogopsis will remain in the spotlight. And seaweed producers are relying on wide-scale adoption to make their investments worthwhile.
It's definitely going to be commercially viable. We have an enormous marine space to be able to expand on in time, and we've developed some super exciting methods for both marine and land-based farming. So it's not as far away as we think.
And that's the show for today. There's one more week of our Best Of series until Landline returns on the 13th of February. I'll see you next week.